Hi, I'm here to talk about request in Python. Let's take a look at Python first. Python is a popular, interpreted, high-level programming language that was first released in 1991 by Guido van Rossum. It is a general-purpose language that is widely used for developing desktop applications, web applications, scientific computing, data analysis, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and more. Python has a simple and easy to read syntax that makes it easy for beginners to learn. Its syntax is designed to be clear and concise, which makes it a popular choice for prototyping, scripting, and automation tasks. Python also has a large and supportive community of developers who contribute to the language and develop a vast array of libraries, frameworks, and tools to make development easier and more efficient. Some key features of Python include simple and easy to read syntax, interpreted language, which means that you can run code without compiling it, dynamic typing, which allows for faster development and easier maintenance, support for object-oriented, functional, and procedural programming paradigms, large and supportive community of developers and users, vast array of libraries and frameworks for various purposes, cross-platform support, which means that Python code can run on various operating systems. Now let's take a look at libraries and modules in Python. Python has a vast number of libraries and modules that can be used for various purposes such as web development, data analysis, machine learning, scientific computing, and more. These libraries and modules contain pre-written code that can be imported into your Python program to provide additional functionality. Here are some of the most popular libraries and modules in Python. NumPy, a library for numerical computing that provides support for large, multi-dimensional arrays and matrices, as well as a large collection of mathematical functions. Pandas, a library for data analysis that provides tools for working with tabular data structures such as CSV files and Excel spreadsheets. Matplotlib, a plotting library that provides tools for creating 2D and 3D plots and visualizations. Scikit-learn, a library for machine learning that provides tools for classification, regression, clustering, and more. TensorFlow, a library for machine learning that provides tools for building and training neural networks. Flask, a web framework for building web applications using Python. Django, a full-stack web framework for building complex web applications. Request, a library for making HTTP requests and interacting with web APIs. Beautiful Soup, a library for parsing HTML and XML documents. OpenCV, a library for computer vision and image processing that provides tools for image and video processing, object detection, and more. These are just a few examples of many libraries and modules available in Python. Depending on your specific use case, there are likely many other libraries and modules that may be useful to you. Now, let's take a look at requests in Python. I just mentioned some popular libraries in Python. One such library is Request. Request is a Python library that is used to send HTTP requests and handle the responses. It is a simple and elegant library that allows developers to interact with web APIs and web pages in a straightforward manner. With Request, you can easily send GET, POST, PUT, DELETE, and other types of HTTP requests to a web server and receive the response in the form of a HTTP response object. You can then parse the response data to extract the information you need. Features of Request Library. Some key features of Request Library include support for HTTP and HTTPS protocols, simple and easy to use API for making HTTP requests, support for handling various types of authentication including basic authentication, digest authentication, and OAuth, built-in support for handling cookies and sessions, support for handling redirects and following links, support for handling errors and exceptions, support for sending data in various formats including JSON, URL, encoded form data, and multi-part encoded files, support for customer headers and user agents, built-in support for handling proxies and SSL TLS certificates. There are a lot of other features as well, like keeping alive and connection pooling is a feature of Python request, elegant key value cookies, international domains and URLs, automatic decompression, Sessions with cookies, persistence, unique or response bodies, etc. are other features of Python requests. Installation. We can install requests using a simple command, pip install request. Making a request. Python request module has several built-in methods to make HTTP request to specified URL using get, post, put, patch, or head request. A HTTP request is meant to either retrieve data from a specified URL or to push data to a server. It works as a request-response protocol between a client and a server. Let's demonstrate how to make a GET request to an endpoint. Get method is used to retrieve information from the given server using a given URL. The get method sends the encoded user information appended to the page request. The page and the encoded information are separated by the question mark character. HTTP request methods. Get. Get method is used to retrieve information from the given server using a given URL. Post. Post request method requests that a web server accepts the data enclosed in the body of request message, most likely for storing it. Put. The put method requests that the enclosed entity be stored under the separate URL. If the URL refers to an already existing resource, it is modified, and if the URL does not point to an existing resource, then the server can create the resource with that URL. Delete. The delete method deletes the specified resource. Head. The head method asks for a response identical to that of a GET request but without the response body. Patch. It is used for modifying capabilities. The patch request only needs to contain the changes to the resource, not the complete resource. Now let's see how to use some of these HTTP request methods. GET request. GET request is used to request the data from the server. First we import the request library and then we will make a response object. Here we call it R and we make the GET request using request library. Inside the GET function, we have to mention the URL that we are going to make the request from. Post request. Just like what we did for the GET function, we will first import request library. Then we define the URL and data that we want to give. After that, we use post function using request keyword, and inside the post function, we give our URL and data. Delete request. After importing request, we will make a response object and make the delete request using request library. Inside the delete function, we mention the URL and data we need to release. Head request. Similar for head request, we can make the request using head function. Response objects. When one makes a request to a URL, it returns a response. This response object in terms of Python is returned by request.method, method being get, post, put, etc. Request response is a powerful object with lots of functions and attributes that assist in normalizing data or creating ideal portions of code. For example, response.status code returns the code from the header itself, and one can check if the request was processed successfully or not. Response object can be used to imply lots of features, methods, and functionalities. Response methods. Response.headers. Response.headers returns a dictionary of response headers. Response.encoding. Response.encoding returns the encoding used to decode response.content. Response.elapsed returns a time delta object with the time elapsed for sending the request to the arrival of the response. Response.close closes the connection to the server. Response.content returns the content of the response in bytes. Response.cookies returns a cookie jar object with the cookies sent back from the server. Response.history returns a list of response objects holding the history of request or the URL. Response.is permanent redirect returns true if the response is the permanent redirected URL, otherwise false. Response.is redirect returns true if the response was redirected, otherwise false. response.iter content iterates over the response.content. Response.json returns the JSON object of the result. Response.url returns the URL of the response. Response.text returns the content of the response in Unicode. Response.status code returns a number that indicates the status. Response.request returns the request object that requested this response. Response.reason returns a text corresponding to the status code. Response.raise4status returns a HTTP error object if an error has occurred during the process. Response.OK returns true if status code is less than 200, otherwise false. Response.links returns the header links. Now let's see how to use some of these methods. Response.status code. First we import request library. Then we will make a response object. Here we call it response. We use the get request and give the specified URL inside the get function. Now all we have to do is to print response.status code. This will return a number that indicates the status. Similarly, if we print response.history, we get a list of objects holding history of the URL. We can use response.json for a JSON object. Similarly, we can use response.isDirect, response.text, etc. according to our need. Next is authentication using Python request. Authentication refers to giving a user permissions to access a particular resource. Since everyone can't be allowed to access data from every URL, one would require authentication primarily. To achieve this authentication, typically one provides authentication data through authorization header or a custom header defined by server. Let's see the code. We first import the request library. Then we import HTTP basic auth from request.auth. Then inside the get function, we give the URL and we give the authentication data using auth equal to HTTP basic auth, and we will give the user ID and password. Next is the session objects. Session object allows one to persist certain parameters across request. It also persists cookies across all requests made from the session instance. And we will use URL lib3's connection pooling. So if several requests are being made to the same host, the underlying TCP connection will be reused, which can result in a significant performance increase. A session object has all the methods of the main request API. Here we will first import a request and create a session object using request.session. Then we will make a get request and again make a get request. Next is cookies and headers. HTTP headers are used to pass additional information with HTTP response or HTTP request. A cookie is a HTTP request header, that is, it is used in the request sent by the user to the server. To send a HTTP request with a cookie using Python, you need to add cookie name equal to value header to your request. To send multiple cookies in a single cookie header, separate them with semicolons or add multiple cookie name equal to value request headers, just like this. Next is the errors and exceptions in request. These are mainly of four types: HTTP error exception, too many redirects exception, connection error exception, and timeout exception. In case of a network problem, request will raise a connection error exception. If the HTTP requests to return an unsuccessful status code like 405 or 404, it will raise a HTTP error. If a request times out, a timeout exception is raised. If a request exceeds a configured number of maximum redirects, too many redirects exception is raised. And that's all about request in Python. Thank you.